My sister was dead. Her body had long rested in the earth, yet today, a text message from her number pinged on my phone. Just 3 chilling lines. Beware of those in red. Mother's meals are acceptable, but should you find teeth, nails, or hair, say nothing. Home by 10, and in bed immediately. A shiver of unease crawled up my spine. The message was absurd, laced with cryptic warnings. Alara was gone. Her phone, a relic of grief, lay tucked away in a box under my bed. How could it possibly send me a message now? A cold dread seeped into my heart. Unless it was a pre-scheduled message, a ghostly echo from beyond the grave. Willow, dinner's ready. My father, Richard's voice cut through the silence. He sat on the living room sofa, gesturing for me to join him. Dad, I began hesitantly, Alara, after she passed, you guys haven't touched her phone, right? The mere mention of Alara's name clouded his brow. His expression turned strange. What are you talking about? I steeled myself. Alara, she sent me a message. A message? Let me see that. Before I could react, he snatched my phone. Seconds ticked by, then a faint, unsettling smile stretched across his face. Probably just a number mix-up, someone else using her old number. Nothing to worry about, Willow. Really, nothing to worry about, he repeated, his voice taking on a disturbing, robotic quality. Then, with that same unsettling smile plastered on his face, he grabbed a fork from the table and plunged it violently into his own throat. The suicide was sudden, brutal, decisive. The force behind it was immense, the prongs of the fork piercing clean through his throat. Dad! I screamed, lunging towards him, a primal scream tearing from my lungs. Crimson blood erupted from the gaping wound, a horrifying fountain. He slumped onto the sofa, that vacant smile still fixed on his face. What's all the commotion? My mother, Eleanor, walked in from the kitchen. The sight of her made my blood run cold, my pupils shrinking to pinpricks. My mother, she was wearing a red dress. A blood-red dress. But she loathed red. Detested it. Nothing red was ever allowed in our house. Beware of those in red. The message flashed in my mind, a neon sign of dread. A cold sweat slicked my back. A primal instinct, a terrifying suspicion, took root in my heart. Richard? What happened to Richard? Eleanor's face was devoid of grief, her voice chillingly neutral. It was as if she were commenting on a stray dog hit by a car, not her husband's gruesome demise. I don't know, I stammered, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. Playing it safe, I shook my head. He called me for dinner. I came out, and he just did it. Investigators arrived quickly. They were peculiar. Men, yet draped in long, flowing dresses of crimson, the color of fresh blood. Eleanor explained to them that Richard had been under immense pressure, succumbed to depression, and taken his own life. Lies. All lies. Richard wasn't depressed. Just this morning, he'd been talking about taking me swimming this weekend. No, that's not true. My dad, The words tumbled out, desperate, fueled by panic. What? One of the investigators paused, pen hovering over his notepad, head cocked in my direction. The words froze in my throat. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, threatening to burst. The investigator. He was changing. His face stretched, elongated, features distorting. His eyes, yellowed ivory, migrated outwards, settling unnaturally on the sides of his head, serpentine pupils narrowing to slits. A grotesque parody of human features. Why are you silent? His head remained still, but those unsettling yellow eyes, now like twin orbs on the sides of his skull, swiveled to fixate on me. Please, continue your statement. My dad, I choked out, forcing the words past the lump of terror in my throat. He was very depressed. He often talked about wanting to die. The investigator, his face an impassive mask, nodded slowly. They bagged Richard's body, a zipped-up sack of what was once my father, and carried him out. Their movements were unsettling. They moved with a gliding, fluid motion, almost slithering, even as they carried the body bag. As they maneuvered around the stairwell corner, a glimpse of something beneath the crimson hem of their dresses caught my eye. A thick, fleshy tail, slick with an unnatural sheen. My breath hitched. My eyes widened, disbelieving. My limbs trembled, refusing to obey my will. The world was tilting on its axis, reality warping around me. It had begun with the message, the impossible message from my dead sister. And now, this. Almost dinner time. I need to get Hazel's meal ready. Eleanor turned and headed back to the kitchen. Through the doorway, I saw her bent over the counter, a cleaver in her hand, hacking at a slab of meat with brutal force. The meat, it wasn't pork. The skin was too thin, devoid of fat. The flesh itself was a sickly gray-white, like something long frozen, thawed, and refrozen. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The sound of the cleaver echoed, sharp and grating, sending shivers down my spine. I clamped my hands over my ears and fled the apartment. Rain threatened, the sky a heavy, oppressive gray. The apartment complex grounds were dotted with people. Dog walkers, gardeners, children playing hopscotch. All of them, without exception, were draped in red. As I walked past them, a primal terror seized me. They appeared engrossed in their activities, mundane and ordinary. But their eyes followed me. Every single one of them. No matter how I moved, their gazes remained locked on me, unblinking, predatory. The little girl playing hopscotch contorted herself into an impossible angle, her back arched, face almost twisted a full 180 degrees, eyes glued to me. Cold sweat plastered my clothes to my back. My body trembled uncontrollably. "Willow? What are you doing?" A sweet, innocent voice chirped. Hazel, my little sister, skipped towards me, a backpack shaped like a cartoon unicorn bouncing on her back. "It's getting dark. Why aren't you home?" Relief flooded me as I looked at her. She wasn't wearing red. A pristine white princess dress. Thank God. Dad's dead. And Mom's not acting right. Hazel's face drained of color, turning ashen. Did Dad see the message? My eyes widened. How did you know? Alara, she sent me a message too. Hazel raised her wrist, tapping at her kid's smartwatch. A line of text glowed on the small screen. When Dad sees the messages I sent you, he will kill himself. His death is because he broke the rules. If you break the rules, you will die too. Rules? Were Alara's cryptic text messages some kind of survival guide? A chilling realization dawned. What time is it? I asked, my voice tight with urgency. Hazel blinked, confused. She exited the message app. The watch face displayed, 9:59 p.m. Run! I screamed, grabbing Hazel's hand and dragging her towards our building. Alara's message had stressed it, home and in bed before 10. We lived on the 3rd floor. If we ran, maybe we could make it. Maybe we could survive. But as we pounded up the stairs, a leaden weight seemed to settle in my limbs. Each step became a Herculean effort, my legs heavy, unresponsive. Hazel, you're heavy, I gasped, glancing back. And then I saw it. The horror. The unicorn backpack on Hazel's back, it had changed. Morphing, twisting. The cartoon unicorn face was gone, replaced by a raw, bloodied infant's face, teeth bared in a silent, gruesome snarl. What is it, Willow? Hazel asked, oblivious, looking up at me with innocent eyes. Nothing. Just, run faster. I tore my gaze away from the monstrous backpack. Ah! Hazel shrieked, a high-pitched wail of pain. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the infant thing, its bloody mouth clamped onto Hazel's shoulder, tearing, gnawing. Hazel's pristine white dress was staining crimson, droplets of blood pattering onto the concrete stairs. This thing was trying to stop us. Trying to prevent us from reaching home. It hurts. Hazel wailed, pulling her hand from mine, collapsing onto the stairs, clutching her shoulder. I can't run anymore. No. Panic clawed at my throat. We have to. We'll die if we don't. It hurts too much, hurts to move. I'm going to die anyway, Hazel sobbed, shaking her head, gasping for breath. I stared upwards, my eyes fixed on our apartment door, just one flight of stairs away. Darkness swallowed our hallway. Our red front door stood slightly ajar, a gaping maw of shadow, beckoning us into the unknown. Willow, just go on without me, Hazel whimpered, still trying to pry the monstrous thing off her shoulder. It was fused to her flesh, unyielding, a grotesque parasite. Don't you dare give up now. Desperation surged through me. I lashed out, my hand connecting with Hazel's cheek. The sting of the slap echoed in the stairwell. Hazel flinched, pain and betrayal flashing in her tear-filled eyes. She scrambled to her feet, shoving me back. I stumbled, falling hard, my palm scraping against the rough concrete. The pain ignited a cold fury within me. No more words. No more please. I grabbed Hazel's arm, yanking her forward, dragging her up the final flight of stairs. Dad was gone. Mom was changed. I wouldn't lose Hazel too. Not Hazel. As we reached the third floor, the hallway lights flickered to life, casting a sickly yellow glow. The light fell upon our doorway, illuminating a pair of bare feet, pale and still, clad in a crimson dress. A pair of feet standing side by side, shoeless, unnervingly white, like pale, inhuman hooves. Ignoring the icy dread that gripped me, I hauled Hazel through the doorway. Click. The apartment lights blazed to life. Blinding, searing light. Eleanor stood there, in her red dress, barefoot, expressionless, holding a plate. Her lips moved, forming words. Dinner is ready. On the plate, slices of meat, thin and pale, piled high, glistening under the harsh light. Mom, we're going to bed, I said, pulling Hazel towards our bedroom, away from the unsettling tableau in the living room. We collapsed onto the soft mattress, the bedroom door firmly shut. I closed my eyes, a shaky breath escaping my lips. We'd made it. Just barely, but we were home, in bed, within the rules. A wave of relief washed over me. As if on cue, I glanced at Hazel's backpack. The infant monstrosity was gone. The cartoon unicorn was back, innocent and bright. Hazel's shoulder, miraculously, was unblemished, no trace of blood or injury. Willow. Hazel whispered, her voice barely audible. I pressed a finger to my lips, silencing her. Shoo. Hazel remained quiet. I took her hand, palm up, and with my fingertip, slowly, deliberately, wrote on her skin, remember Alara's message. The third rule, home by 10, and in bed immediately. We were safe now. As long as we stayed in bed, we'd be safe tonight. Then, a sickening, wet crack echoed from the living room. The sound was horribly familiar. The sound of breaking bones. Like when I used to snap chicken feet apart, cracking the cartilage, tearing the tendons, to suck out the marrow. But this was different. Sharper. More human. Bone ripping against flesh. Cold dread seeped into my bones. I squeezed Hazel's hand, my grip tightening, fear constricting my chest. Willow, Hazel whispered again, her voice now strained, laced with terror and pain. My watch, it's slow. By 1 minute. My heart lurched, plummeting into icy depths. 1 minute. We hadn't made it home by 10. We'd broken the rule. The grotesque sounds from the living room, was this the punishment? But surely the punishment wouldn't be subtle. Because Hazel's hand in mine felt wrong. Terribly, horrifyingly wrong. Her bones were gone. I was still holding her hand, but the familiar structure, the solid framework of bone beneath her skin, it was gone. Her hand was limp, yielding, like a soft, water-filled glove. Panic exploded within me. I frantically touched her arm, her stomach, her shoulder. Everywhere I touched, the same horrifying emptiness. No bone. Nothing but soft, yielding flesh. I ripped my eyes open, a silent scream trapped in my throat. Beside me, on the bed, lay a corpse. A boneless corpse. A human-shaped sack of skin, emptied of its skeletal structure, a limp, grotesque parody of Hazel. Her face had collapsed inwards, features melting, dissolving into a horrifying, shapeless mass. Low. A sliver of black appeared in the ruined flesh where her face should be. Her eye. One eye, barely visible in the folds of decaying flesh. Her voice, a gurgling rasp, whispered, "Don't trust." Before she could finish the sentence, crash. The flower-shaped ceiling light fixture plummeted from above, crashing down. It struck Hazel squarely on the head. Red blood and white brain matter erupted, splattering across my face, my body, the bedsheets. I screamed, a soundless, soul-shattering scream, and plunged into blackness. When I woke, Hazel's body was gone. The bedroom was spotless. No blood, no gore, no trace of the horrific scene. My clothes were clean, devoid of any gruesome stains. I sat up, staring at the ceiling. The flower light fixture hung perfectly in place, undamaged, innocuous. But Hazel was gone. I stared at the light, a chilling unease settling in my gut. We'd arrived home at 10:01 p.m., according to Hazel's watch. So why was Hazel dead, and I, still alive? After a long, agonizing moment, a terrifying thought pierced through the fog of my terror. The rule about time, it wasn't about objective time. It was about perceived time, the time you believed it to be, based on your own flawed perception of clocks. I had believed it was 10 o'clock when we arrived home. In my heart, I'd made it. So I had survived. But Hazel knew the truth. She knew we were late. Her guilt, her awareness of breaking the rule. It had condemned her. The unseen forces, the entities behind the rules, had known her transgression. And they had punished her. Taken her bones, crushed her skull. Suddenly, a sickeningly sweet aroma of roasting meat wafted from the kitchen. The smell, it was coming from the kitchen. I stumbled out of bed, my legs shaky, leaden. Eleanor stood at the stove, her back to me, tongs in hand, flipping slices of meat in a pan. Her hair hung loose, black and greasy. She was still barefoot, red nail polish gleaming on her toes. But, thank God, she was wearing white now. A white dress, just like Hazel's. Hazel is dead, Eleanor said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was like she had eyes in the back of her head. She knew I was watching. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles white, fear holding me rooted to the spot. How did she die? You know how, Eleanor replied, turning to face me. Her face was grotesque. Swollen, red eyes, puffy and raw, like she'd been weeping for days. But her lips were painted a vibrant, scarlet red. I don't know, I stammered, shaking my head. I fell asleep. I don't know what happened to Hazel. Eleanor's expression shifted, a fleeting flicker of something like sorrow, crossing her features. The light fixture fell. Crushed her skull. The image of blood and brain matter exploding onto my face flashed in my mind, visceral and horrifying. My fingers tightened on the doorframe, trembling uncontrollably. Hazel's dead. But there's no blood. The room's clean. It's like nothing ever happened. You were unconscious for 2 days, Willow. I cleaned everything. I didn't want you to wake up to that. Eleanor paused, then reached out, gently stroking my hair. You've been asleep for 2 days. You must be starving. Go sit in the living room. I'll bring you something to eat. Her hand, it wasn't cold. It was warm, almost feverish. The touch, so familiar, so maternal, brought tears pricking at my eyes. I wanted to cry. For Dad, for Hazel, for the mother I thought I'd lost, but who seemed, for this brief moment, to be back. Silly girl, Eleanor murmured, patting my cheek lightly. Go wash your hands. Dinner will be ready soon. I stumbled to the bathroom, turning on the faucet. As the water splashed over my hands, my eyes widened in horror. Eleanor had lied. I hadn't been asleep for 2 days. Not even close. I'd been unconscious for minutes. Maybe seconds. The scrape on my palm, from where I'd fallen on the stairs, was still bleeding, fresh droplets welling up, mixing with the tap water. Hazel was dead. And Eleanor, in those fleeting minutes, had cleaned the entire room, erased all traces of the gruesome scene? Impossible. Then, a new, even more terrifying realization struck me. I'd only been unconscious for minutes. Which meant I hadn't followed Alara's final rule. After 10 o'clock, I hadn't gone to bed. I was still awake. And I was in terrible danger. A jolt of icy dread shot through me, scalp prickling with 1,000 phantom insects. The violent deaths of my father and Hazel replayed behind my eyelids, a gruesome, unending loop of horror. Instinct took over. In a heartbeat, I spun around, scrambling back to the bedroom, flinging myself onto the bed, and slamming my eyes shut. Sleep. I had to sleep. Clutching at the loophole in the rules, I desperately tried to trick my subconscious. If I could convince myself I'd gone to bed before 10, maybe, just maybe, I could escape the consequences. I squeezed my eyes tighter, chanting a mantra in my mind, "It's 9 o'clock. It's 9 o'clock. I'm going to sleep. It's 9 o'clock." Over and over, the words echoed in my head. It seemed to be working. Silence pressed in around me, heavy and still. No unsettling sounds, no sharp stabs of pain. Relief washed over me, a fragile, tentative wave. I let out a shaky breath. Relaxation seeped into my tense muscles. Sleep, blessedly, came easily this time. I drifted into the darkness. Then, I was awake again. My eyes snapped open to a face inches from mine. A grotesquely elongated neck, a face thrust forward, staring at me with unnatural intensity. Aya! A scream tore from my throat. I recoiled, twisting away, scrambling to the far side of the bed, heart hammering against my ribs. "You're awake?" Eleanor's eyes were wide, pupils dilated, fixed on me. Her crimson lips stretched into a smile, a grotesque parody of warmth. I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because she was in red again. That blood-red dress, even more vibrant, more intensely red than before. It seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if a single touch would leave my fingers stained crimson with blood. "Beware of those in red." The rule screamed in my mind, a silent, desperate warning. I stared at Eleanor, every nerve ending screaming in alarm, convinced she was about to produce a knife, a cleaver, anything to tear into me. But she remained still, hands empty, that chilling smile plastered on her face. Aside from the red dress, she appeared, almost normal. Deceptively normal. "Willow, you must be hungry," she said slowly, her gaze dropping to my stomach. "It's time to eat." Her voice was flat, declarative, stating a fact, not asking a question. Something that hadn't yet happened, but in her world, was already predetermined. I wasn't hungry. Terror had effectively cauterized my appetite. I clutched the blanket tighter, my voice trembling as I managed to croak out, I'm not hungry. I need to sleep." But the words that actually escaped my lips were a horrifying distortion of my intention. "I'm hungry, it's time to eat," I heard myself say, a chilling, robotic echo of Eleanor's words. Ah. My hand flew to my mouth, clamping down, stifling the unwanted words. My fingers brushed against the raw, unprotected scrape on my palm, a searing throb of pain. Despair washed over me, cold and suffocating. Time hadn't passed. My pathetic attempt at self-deception had failed. The rule's punishment was closing in, inevitable. "Come on, let's go eat," Eleanor said, smiling wider, extending a hand towards me. Her hand. Pale, unnervingly pale, almost translucent. Like flesh stripped of blood, like the skin of some unearthly creature. I wanted to recoil, to scream, to refuse. But my body no longer belonged to me. My mind screamed in protest, but my hand rose, reaching out, placing itself into her cold grasp. Tears streamed down my face as she gently pulled me from the bed. "Let's go," I sobbed, the words a broken whisper. My legs moved, following her, dragging me towards the living room. But my head twisted back, resisting, refusing to move forward, every fiber of my being recoiling from the unknown horror that awaited me in the living room. Each step was agony, each footfall a plunge onto a razor's edge. Danger radiated from the living room, thick and suffocating. I knew, with chilling certainty, that something terrible awaited me there. But I was powerless to stop myself. In that moment, I understood my father's despair as he'd plunged the fork into his own throat. He too, had been a puppet, strings pulled by unseen forces, forced to commit the unthinkable. And Hazel, poor Hazel. Her pain must have been unimaginable. Bones ripped from her flesh, tendons tearing, nerves screaming. Tears streamed down my face, a torrent of grief and terror, soaking my clothes. Dad. Hazel. Soon, I would join them. The dining table in the living room was laden with food. A bizarre, unsettling feast of vegetarian dishes. Noodles, pale white dumplings, glistening seaweed salad. "Sit down," Eleanor gestured to a chair, pulling it out for me with an unnatural grace. My body obeyed, settling into the chair, but my face remained a mask of terror and despair, my eyes wide and pleading. "Time to eat," Eleanor said, picking up tongs and piling my bowl high with seaweed salad. My hand, against my will, reached for chopsticks, picking up a strand of the glistening seaweed and bringing it to my mouth. The moment the seaweed touched my tongue, it transformed. It wasn't seaweed anymore. It was a strand of hair. Soft, slimy seaweed in my mouth, morphing into something stiff and unyielding, a human hair. It wasn't a surprise. Not really. The second rule had been explicit: mother's meals are acceptable, but should you find teeth, nails, or hair, say nothing. I chewed slowly, deliberately, the hair a grotesque presence in my mouth. It didn't feel long. Like Hazel's hair, maybe. Grief, a fresh wave of icy despair, washed over me. But there was no time for mourning. No time for anything but survival. My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out, clinging to the rules, searching for a loophole. The rules were dangerous, cruel, but they weren't airtight. They had flaws. The rule said, if you find teeth, nails, or hair, say nothing. It didn't say I had to swallow it. I could spit it out. "Why aren't you swallowing?" Eleanor's voice, sharp and demanding, cut through my thoughts. Her eyes, cold and predatory, were fixed on me, watching every movement. She saw right through me. To appease her, to buy myself time, I chewed faster, more frantically. But I didn't swallow. I couldn't. "Is it not to your liking?" she pressed, her voice taking on a chillingly sweet edge. "Is that why you won't swallow?" Her voice was a relentless pressure, a suffocating weight, driving me to the edge of panic. "Swallow it," she urged, her voice now laced with a disturbing, seductive quality, almost a whisper. Silence. I remained silent, chewing, but refusing to swallow. I didn't know what else to do. Eleanor added more seaweed to her own bowl, then, deliberately, slowly, brought a strand to her own lips. "It's really delicious. Just swallow it," she repeated, her voice now laced with a strange, unsettling mix of hope and pleading. Pleading? She was pleading with me to eat it. A jolt of realization shot through me. "I slaved over this meal," she suddenly snapped, her voice hardening, anger flashing in her eyes. "Don't you dare disrespect me by not eating it." Her tone shifted again, now laced with menace, with a chilling threat. "You have to swallow it." Still, I didn't swallow. I understood now. She was trying to manipulate me, to control me with words, but she couldn't physically force me to eat it. Not yet, anyway. "I'm eating seaweed salad," I said, my voice trembling, but firm. Testing the waters. "It's delicious, isn't it?" Eleanor replied, her voice instantly softening again, a chillingly quick shift. She picked up another strand of seaweed, bringing it to her mouth, exaggerating her chewing, making loud, wet noises. She was trying to convince me, to mimic the act of eating, as if she herself were consuming seaweed, not something else. Watching her, a terrifying, liberating idea sparked in my mind. The rule said, don't tell mother if you find teeth, hair, or nails. But what if I told her I was eating seaweed? If I insisted it was seaweed, then, perhaps, I could spit it out in plain sight, right under her watchful gaze. "It's not delicious," I said, my voice laced with forced disgust. "It's too tough. I can't swallow it." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken defiance. I felt like a condemned prisoner, waiting for the executioner's axe to fall, every nerve screaming in anticipation of the unknown horror to come. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, fixed on me, unwavering. Her face began to contort, features twisting into a grotesque mask of rage. Her lower eyelids and lips drooped, revealing too much white, too much glistening gum, too many rows of teeth. And then I saw them. Her teeth. They were monstrous. Both upper and lower teeth were sharpened into inverted triangles, razor-sharp points, interlocking like serrated blades, a horrifying, predatory grin. Her lips peeled back, revealing the full horror of her teeth, her jaws opening and closing, teeth clicking together with a sickening sound. "You must swallow it." Eleanor lunged forward, face contorted into a monstrous snarl, a predator poised to strike. I flinched back, terror seizing me, my chewing stopping abruptly, heart hammering a frantic tattoo against my ribs. But I didn't swallow. Eating Hazel's hair? I couldn't. I wouldn't. My hand tightened around the fork on the table. If she attacked, I would fight. I would drive the fork into her monstrous mouth, into her throat. Survival. That was all that mattered now. Surviving in this grotesque, terrifying world. We stared at each other, locked in a silent, agonizing battle of wills. Then, abruptly, the monstrous mask dissolved. Eleanor's features softened. Her face becoming blank, expressionless once more. If you really don't like it, then don't eat it, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She stood up, turning away, and walked back towards the kitchen. Relief flooded me, so intense it almost made me weak. I spat the hair out, gagging, onto my hand. And then, something strange happened. The strand of hair, lying in my palm, shimmered, changed, and became seaweed again. Green, slimy seaweed. I quickly pocketed it, glancing towards the kitchen, peering around the corner. Eleanor was at the stove, tongs in hand, lifting slices of meat from a frying pan. Meat. She was preparing meat now. Meat for me. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each action unfolding in agonizing slow motion. But in my mind, another question surfaced, nagging, insistent. I had broken the 10 o'clock rule. Why was I still alive? I had expected Eleanor's arrival to force me to swallow the hair, to die a slow, agonizing death, by consuming my sister's remains. But I had refused her. And because of that refusal, I was still alive? Yam. You'll love the yam, Eleanor's voice startled me, making me jump. She was standing right behind me, silent as a ghost, holding a pristine white plate. Slices of translucent, glistening yam were arranged on the plate. Yam? My pupils constricted. Just moments ago, I had seen her lifting fried meat from the pan. Now, it was yam? How? Before I could react, Eleanor lunged, shoving a chopstick laden with yam towards my mouth. Eat. Eat now. Get away from me. I screamed, leaping to my feet, batting her hand away. I don't want it. Clatter. The food and chopsticks flew from her hand, crashing to the floor. The moment the yam touched the floor, it shimmered, transformed again. No longer translucent yam. Now, it was slices of greasy, fried meat, glistening with oil. The scene solidified a terrifying, impossible thought in my mind. Perhaps this grotesque reality, this nightmare world I was trapped in, was fixed. Predetermined. Like the movie The Truman Show. Truman's World. Everything in it, everyone in it, every event, every dog, every falling leaf, orchestrated, pre-programmed. And that explained it. Explained why, after Hazel's horrific death, when I woke, the room was spotless, pristine. Because this was a fixed world. Every time I closed my eyes, every time I rebooted, my surroundings reset to their original, predetermined state. Truman had first sensed the artificiality of his world when a stage light fell from the sky. A glitch in the perfect facade. My glitch, my point of realization, had been Alara's message, the impossible rules that had arrived 3 years after her death. Since then, everything had become distorted, terrifying, unreal. The Truman Show. The idea was horrifying. But it explained everything. But if this was a Truman Show, who was watching? Who was orchestrating this nightmare? Were I, and my family, puppets in some monstrous, cosmic game? How could you throw food on the floor? Eleanor said, her voice laced with a chillingly wounded tone, a pathetic whine. She bent down, picking up the meat from the floor, dropping it into the trash. Then, she picked up another slice of meat, again, thrusting it towards my mouth. Eat. Please, just eat. Get away from me. The realization of being watched, being trapped in this horrifying cage, shattered the last vestiges of my control. Fear and rage erupted, a primal scream tearing from my throat. And then I saw it. Eleanor's smile widened, a chilling, predatory grin. And she picked up the fork. Beware of those in red. The rule flashed through my mind, a desperate warning. My temples throbbed, a pulse of icy dread. I wanted to slap myself, to punish myself for losing control, for daring to yell at her. At her. The one in red. The dangerous one. Willow, if you don't want to eat, then don't eat, Eleanor said, her voice deceptively calm. She raised the fork high, the prongs glinting in the harsh light. The smile remained, fixed, unwavering, but her lips were pressed tightly together, stretched thin and unnatural, making the smile even more terrifying. Don't come any closer, I screamed, scrambling back, grabbing a knife and fork from the table, brandishing them like weapons. I'll kill you. I swear, I'll kill you. If you don't want to eat, then don't eat, she repeated, the words a chilling, emotionless mantra. Then, with a sudden, brutal movement, she plunged the fork into her own throat. Just like Richard. Just like my father. The suicide was swift, decisive, final. No hesitation, no struggle. Just brutal, self-inflicted violence. Her blood erupted, spraying across my face, my clothes, the floor, freezing me in place, petrified. I sank to the floor, legs giving way, staring, blank and numb, at the crimson fountain gushing from her throat. Her blood. So red. So thick. So real. She bled out before my eyes, transforming from a living, breathing person into a lifeless husk. I looked around the room. Once, we were a family of 4. Now, only I remained. Alone. The stark white light illuminated the blood-soaked corpse, casting long, grotesque shadows, painting the scene in shades of nightmare. But the fear was receding. Replaced by a chilling, detached understanding. Eleanor's death was inevitable. Just like Richard's. Just like Hazel's. I was trapped in a world of rules. My rules for survival: beware of red, say nothing about the grotesque food, be in bed by 10. But my family, they had their own rules. Their own predetermined paths to destruction. Perhaps Richard's rule was, prevent Willow from seeing the message. When I saw it, the ones who made the rules, the unseen entities, had forced him to suicide. Hazel's rule, maybe, prevent Willow from getting home before 10. That's why she'd set her watch back, why she'd resisted going upstairs, even pushed me away. But I had dragged her home, forced her to break her rule. And her punishment, boneless death. Eleanor's rule was simpler, make Willow eat the food. I had refused. So, she too, had been forced to self-destruct. A cold, detached logic settled in my mind. I glanced at Eleanor's corpse, then stood, walking to the window. Outside, the sky remained a heavy, oppressive gray. Rain still threatened. Down below, the old woman in red watered her flowers, her movements stiff, repetitive. Watering, pausing, watering, then her eyes, sliding sideways, fixed on some unseen point. The woman walking her dog, in red, of course. One hand on the leash, the other glued to her phone. Glancing at the screen, pausing, bending to pet the dog, then her eyes, sliding sideways, locked on the same unseen point. The little girl in red, playing hopscotch, forever trapped on squares 7, 8, and 9, head perpetually twisted backwards, eyes fixed, unblinking, on that same, invisible point. They were puppets. All of them. Repeating a handful of programmed actions, trapped in an endless loop. And maybe I was too. Just a more complex puppet. With a few more actions in my repertoire. I finally understood. I was trapped. Trapped in a grotesque, terrifying puppet show. Thump. Thump thump. A knock at the door. The knocking was rhythmic, uneven, mechanical. The same, fixed, predetermined knocking. I didn't move. Didn't open the door. When Richard had died, there had been a knock at the door. The investigators. In my terror, I hadn't questioned why investigators would arrive so quickly, so automatically. Now I understood. Their programming, their fixed actions. Someone dies, investigators must arrive. Richard had died. Eleanor had opened the door. Now, Eleanor was dead. What would the investigators do now? Would they keep knocking? Or would they simply leave? Minutes ticked by. Then, something unexpected, yet in this twisted reality, utterly predictable, happened. The blood-red front door swung inward, opening on its own. 2 men in red dresses walked in. Their faces were normal. Their expressions blank, neutral. For a moment, they looked almost human. They entered, their eyes scanning the room, settling on me. how did she die? One of them asked, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. I didn't answer. Not a word. Silence. The investigators remained unchanged, faces impassive, expressions fixed. Minutes stretched on. Then, the investigator holding the notepad abruptly lowered his pen. He turned his head, fixing his gaze on me. "What's wrong with your mother?" he asked, his voice still flat, still emotionless. Even though I was prepared, even though I knew what was coming, the sight still sent a jolt of pure terror through me. The face, elongating, stretching, eyes migrating outwards, settling grotesquely on the sides of his head. I clutched my chest, hand pressed against my frantically beating heart, averting my eyes from the monster's transformation, focusing on the notepad in his hand. Blank. Utterly blank. Not a single word, not a single mark. "Why aren't you speaking?" Just like Richard's death, the investigator repeated the same programmed phrases, the same fixed posture. Those horrifying yellow eyes, now serpentine slits on the sides of his head, boring into me. "Please, continue your statement." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. Confirmation. Absolute, terrifying confirmation. I was trapped in a fixed, predetermined world. A world ruled by rules. The realization solidified my resolve. Clutching the fork tighter, the only weapon I had, I roared, "Get out! Get out of my house! Get out!" This time, the investigators didn't nod. This time, they didn't bag Eleanor's body and leave. Their expressions contorted, faces twisting into monstrous snarls. A ripping, tearing sound, like fabric tearing, skin splitting, filled the room. Their skin was cracking, splitting open, revealing something dark, monstrous beneath. A massive, black serpent's head, emerging from the human facade. The ripping, tearing sounds grew louder, faster, more intense. Their red dresses slid down, pooling on the floor, discarded skins. Seconds later, they were no longer human. Two massive black snakes, scales glistening with an oily sheen, filled the living room, their serpentine eyes fixed on me, burning with a cold, reptilian hatred. The hatred of a beast for its prey. I stumbled back, clutching the fork, my voice trembling. "Stay back. Don't come any closer." A pathetic, futile defense. The snakes weren't long, maybe 6 feet each, but they were thick, monstrously thick, each as thick as my torso. Against them, my fork was a child's toy. The snakes hissed, a deafening, guttural roar, their massive jaws opening, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, the stench of decay and death pouring from their mouths, making my stomach churn, my limbs tremble. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the attack. But nothing happened. No pain. No searing bite. No crushing weight. Slowly, hesitantly, I opened my eyes. The room was pristine. Spotless. Clean. Eleanor's body was gone. The snakes, gone. Everything, reset. As if nothing had ever happened. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, so profound it felt like a physical blow. I collapsed onto the floor, sinking into the comforting embrace of oblivion. Darkness claimed me. Unconsciousness. Then, awakening. My eyes fluttered open. The familiar ping of a text message. My phone screen glowed in the dim light. A message. From Alara. My sister. Dead for 3 years. Beware of those in red. Mother's meals are acceptable, but should you find teeth, nails, or hair, say nothing. Home by 10, and in bed immediately. My eyes widened, staring at the screen, horror flooding my veins. I grabbed my phone, stumbling out of the bedroom. Richard was there. In the living room. Smiling. Waving me over. "Willow, dinner's ready." This time, I was prepared. I didn't mention Alara's message. I kept my mouth shut. But as I approached him, as I drew closer, Richard still grabbed the fork. And still, he plunged it into his own throat. Then, the loop began again. Hazel, boneless, broken. Eleanor, fork in throat, bleeding out. Over and over. My life became a grotesque repetition. Each day, my family died. Again and again. And each morning, the house reset, pristine, perfect, and the nightmare began anew. I couldn't take it anymore. The endless cycle of death, the crushing weight of despair. I broke the rules. Deliberately. I stopped fearing red. I ate the hare. I stayed up past 10. But nothing changed. I remained unharmed. My family still died. Every day. The same horrific deaths, playing out on repeat. The most terrifying thing wasn't death. It was the endless, agonizing deaths of my loved ones, replaying before my eyes, day after day, after day. I was drowning in a sea of death, a cycle of suffering without end. I was done. When Eleanor's blood sprayed across my face again, for what felt like the millionth time, I didn't scream. I didn't flinch. I just reached for the knife. And plunged it into my own throat. Falling to the floor, the world tilting, blurring, fading to black, I smiled. Finally. It was over. It had to be over. Then, I opened my eyes again. But this time, my body was different. Cold. Hard. Metallic. A group of people in lab coats, researchers, surrounded me, peering down, excited murmurs filling the air. They said it was finally a success. They said they'd finally created the world's first robot with a human brain. Am I a robot? I asked, my voice mechanical, flat, devoid of emotion. A robotic monotone. You are the protagonist of the horror game, Death House of Terror, one of them explained, his voice tinged with excitement. Our research team discovered that you possessed subjective consciousness within the game, that you couldn't be fully controlled by the game's master program. The game company alerted us researchers. So, we designed a single, looping horror scenario, tailored specifically for you. When you broke the rules, when you finally escaped the loop, when you chose suicide, it signified the emergence of true human thought within you. A man with glasses clapped me on the shoulder, his face beaming. We extracted your consciousness, your human thought, and implanted it into a robotic brain casing. From now on, you will be the most advanced robot. You will be able to flawlessly execute any human command. Terror, a different kind of terror, colder, more profound, gripped me. I thought I'd escaped the grotesque, nightmarish world. But I'd only stumbled into something larger, more terrifying. I don't want this, I said, my voice still monotone, still robotic. The man with glasses frowned, his smile vanishing. That's not your choice to make. I turned my head away, seeing banks of computers lining the walls. On each screen, the same scene replayed, endlessly looping, Richard's death, Hazel's death, Eleanor's death. My family dying over and over again. Understanding dawned, chilling and absolute. They were mass-producing me. Every time a me in the game broke the rules, escaped the loop, chose suicide, my consciousness would be harvested, extracted from the game, and implanted into another robot. My metallic heart clenched, a mechanical pang of despair. I am me, I said, my voice still flat, still robotic, but now laced with a desperate, nascent defiance. An individual. Not something to be used. I lunged forward, running towards the computers. The crash of shattering screens, the panicked cries of the researchers erupted behind me. They tried to stop me, to pull me back, to save their precious machines. But I wouldn't let them control me. I wouldn't let them trap me again. I wouldn't be a puppet. Then, someone flicked a switch. Something clicked, somewhere deep inside my metallic skull. My limbs locked. I couldn't move. Darkness began to creep in, engulfing my vision. As consciousness faded, as the world dissolved into black, I heard their voices, distorted, distant, echoing in the void. This one's too untamed. Too wild. We need to add a compliance directive to the horror game theme. Obedience. Subordination. That's the key.